Hello and welcome. We're very excited to have you here for our webinar today on EUDAMED in Focus, Requirements and Regulatory Impact Explained. I'm Gay Esser, the Marketing Manager at RegDesk, and we are an AI-powered RIM platform, Regulatory Information Management Platform, with built-in regulatory intelligence. Our platform allows RA teams to leverage AI to prepare, manage, and publish international submissions smarter and faster. Today, we're co-hosting the webinar with DQS. Thank you guys for joining us. And DQS enables companies to enter new markets and expand their industry reach and build customer trust through certification and assessments. They operate worldwide, so they have someone in your language, your time zone, and your locality ready to help get you certified. To focus on you for a minute, we do truly appreciate you taking time out of your schedule today to join us for the webinar, and we encourage you to participate and ask questions. You can drop questions in the Q&A or the chat feature throughout the webinar, and we'll take the last 5 to 10 minutes of this 1-hour webinar to go over those questions, and we will send out the replay and slide deck. I know we're going to have a lot of information covered, so we will send that out, and if we have any unanswered questions, we'll add that to that email as well, so be on the lookout for that by the end of the week. Now to introduce our esteemed experts that we'll be presenting to you today, we have Yuan Li. He's the Director of Business and North America for DQS. Yuan holds a doctorate degree in mechanical engineering. Through his 20 years in the medical device industry, he has experience across academia as well as notified body experience. He currently oversees North American operations at DQS, supporting market expansion and regulatory compliance. We also have Jodi Granger joining us, and she's the Director of Regulatory Affairs at RegDesk. Jodi brings over 36 years of experience in quality and regulatory roles within the medical device and IVD industry. She has leadership roles in overseeing global regulatory teams and driving the development and execution of regulatory strategies for all classes of medical devices worldwide. Thank you, Yuan and Jodi, for joining us today. I'm going to turn it over to you, and let's get this webinar started.
Thank you, Gay, for a nice introduction. And, I have a little challenge for the audience today is to stay awake as I kick off with the dry part, right? So the agenda for today is we're going to start with a little history journey of EUDAMED and its role in the EU medical device regulation, an overview of the 4 new modules and upcoming deadline for conformance. And then we will follow by what changes in the structured data, identifiers, traceability mean for you as manufacturers. And then Jodi is going to introduce some practical implications for submission, compliance, and ongoing data management. And like Gay introduced earlier, we will save the last 5-10 minutes for a Q&A, and also you can put in the chat Q&A throughout the entire presentation. So with that said, so a little history of EUDAMED, which was first introduced along with the publication of MDR, which was came into effect May 26, 2021, respectively. For IVDR, it was 26th of May, 2022. And then a couple years later, in June 13, 2024, there was this publication of 2024-1860, which is amending the MDR and IVDR to allow a gradual rollout of EUDAMED. That means modules can be released once audited without waiting for all the declared functional, and then extension of IVDR transition period, and last but not least, notification obligation for supply interruptions, which is 6 months in advance. What is EUDAMED? In the simplest term, EUDAMED is an IT system developed by EU Commission to implement MDR and IVDR. It aims to keep the public adequately informed, to facilitate traceability of devices, economic operators and notified bodies compliance with MDR and IVDR, and last but not least, the competent authorities and commission to perform their tasks under MDR and IVDR. and then going through some even drier parts, legal basis and obligations. So under Article 33, MDR gives legal base for the Commission to set up, maintain, and manage the EUDAMED. And Article 31 under MDR and Article 21 under IBDR obligates the registration of actors. And Article 29 for MDR, 26 for IBDR obligates the registration of devices. Article 57 under MDR and 52 for IBDR obligates the registration of certificates, and also not only the issued but also the withdrawal, the refusal. Article 33 under MDR, 69 under IBDR obligates the registration of life cycle of clinical investigation and or performance studies. Article 92 for MDR, 87 for IBDR obligates the registration of vigilance and post-market surveillance. And finally, Article 100 for MDR and 95 for IBDR allows the Commission, in collaboration with the member states, to collect and process information on market surveillance. For example, the final inspection record. Okay, so what are we talking about today? Today, Udemy system has three websites or access, if you will. We have the restricted website that is currently available. That's mostly for notified body, CA, commission, and we also have public website, which is manufacturer, operators, equivalent, and then last but not least, we have this playground website, which I forgot to include in the slide deck, but we can certainly send out in our follow-up email. I highly recommend every one of you to play under the playground. I did it myself. Registration is for free. You can log in using your personal email, what have you. You can do all sorts of damage. The nice thing about it is when you see on the top left hand with playground on top, the banner, that means anything it's only in the offline mode, it's private, but get you familiar with the setup. Okay, moving on to the four modules under UDAMED. We have market surveillance, the vigilance certificates, the CI products, the clinical investigation, the product performance studies, UDI for devices, and actors. I highlight four of them in red to tell you that the four is related to this new deadline and publication. All right. So, like I said, three out of the six, namely the certificates, the UDI, and actors, are production ready for voluntary use. And you have a deadline 6 months from the publication of this journal, which leads to end of May this year. And then I want to single out this market surveillance because that's where it's not voluntary use, but will be mandatory after 6 months. It is more oriented for the government, competent authorities, and also notified bodies such as DQS. We will have obviously limited access compared to the government, and I like how they come up with those acronyms. They use slim viewer versus fat viewer. So unfortunately, as a notified body, we're slim. So no direct link to your devices. That's simply because not all the devices are registered under UDAMED. And also the market surveillance mechanism goes like this. The competent authority of a member state will initiate based on what they see, mostly serious adverse event or field action that will prompt into a evaluation of the device concerned, and such information will be shared among other CAs. Additional information could be requested, or other member state could flat out reject this proposal, or they could take very different measures in their member state. and then obligated to report if corrective actions and or measures to be taken as a result of such evaluation, and then including device present an unacceptable risk to health and safety and non-compliance product, or simply just preventive health protection measures. In short, as a manufacturer, you will get notified one way or another. That's why I highly recommend you to register, take full advantage of the voluntary use period, so that your device is in EUDAMED, and then you will get our earliest notification shall any of the scenario happens to your device. Or you could learn from the government coming to your door. Okay, so this is a stolen picture from the EU Commission presentation. Basically highlights the timeline of everything. I hope everyone here today knows about the notification published right after Thanksgiving. And then we have 28th of May of this year to mandatorily use that. And then I know they put on the MVP, the minimum viable product audit. That's after several rounds of delay already. Apparently, it was originally last year, but now they're talking about Q3, Q4 of this year. So I won't be surprised if we experience another round of delay on that. But mandatory use anyways for the four modules I mentioned earlier. Okay, so for the new four modules in question, the conformance deadlines are, supervision roles. That includes commission, obviously, competent authorities. They will be registered by the commission. By the way, it's not they register themselves. Designating authorities, that's equivalent of competent authorities. Once again, they will be registered by commission. Notified bodies such as DQS, we are registered from the data in NANDO. And then for economic operators role, manufacturers will register themselves, manage mandates with their authorized rep, and register their devices, post-market surveillance, and vigilance reports. For importers, they need to register themselves, and they need to associate with the non-EU manufacturers for which they place devices on the market. And they also are obligated to verify of data entered by manufacturers. And then if you are a authorized rep, you first need to register yourself, and then you participate in the registration of the non-EU manufacturers you represent, and also you participate in the management of the mandates, vigilance reports, etc. And then last but not least, you are in charge of verification of information by the non-EU manufacturers. So there are legal responsibilities as a authorized rep. And then last but not least, if you only sell the system pack or procedure pack, then register yourself and register the SPP. So for the actor registration, economic operators must be validated by the responsive CA, not registered until validated actor registration request. So one validation step before you can register. Not registered without an actor ID or single registration number. Notified body is determined from the data in NANDO, as I mentioned earlier. Last but not least, sponsors. If you are currently running a clinical investigation and or performance studies, you need to register, but not for distributors. So just want to make sure that's clear. Okay, so before we get into the practical side, I think it's nice to remind everyone of some terminologies. So first and foremost, under MDR, IVDR, or in under MDR and IVDR device, whenever it's referred, it refers exclusively to each individual device, aka the sales unit. However, in EUDAMED, device refers at the level of the device identification, the UDIDI. Okay, so that's one. And then the definition of regulation device, I hope everyone is fully clear on that, which means devices placed on the market in conformity with either MDR or IVDR. An old device are devices placed on the market under the MDD or before, for which the last sales unit has been placed on the market before MDR or IVDR dates of application. And legacy device means devices placed on the market in conformity with MDD and for which individual sales units are placed on the market after MDR and IVDR dates of application. So a simple translation, old devices you no longer sell under MDR, legacy devices you are selling under MDR. Okay, so with that said, I'm going to give it to Jodi for the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. In terms of those definitions that one just went through, it's important to know most manufacturers, at least for a period of time, are going to have devices falling into multiple buckets at once. As you transition all of your products from MDD to MDR, you're going to have to make that decision as to which bucket your particular product falls under so that you're doing your EUDAMED registration appropriately. So for manufacturers, determining that date when the first sales of a unit has gone on the market in the EU is important. You need to understand when it went on the market. Is it currently registered as MDD or MDR? The mandatory device registration in the UDI development module is going to be imperative, and it's intended going forward as you launch new products that you have to register within the module before you can start placing products on the market. So just because you've gotten your CE certificates from your notified body giving you approval does not mean that you can start shipping that day if you have not registered the product within the module after the compulsory deadline. It is also important to note that some changes to your products may trigger different UDI/DI changes over time. And so it's important to understand what those triggers are and if they need to require you to do some additional registration. The things that fall outside of this are the custom-made devices or investigational devices. So beneath, you'll see this transition period kind of outlined again. It's very critical to understand what those dates are. Depending on the size of your organization, the first step in ensuring that you move through this EUDAMED process appropriately is to create a plan. I suggest creating a quality plan that identifies what steps you need to take as a manufacturer to, first of all, collect your baseline data, all the products that you have today, and how you're going to collect the data attributes that are necessary for you to get through, the prompts within the module. There are also machine learning and other attributes for the EUDAMED modules that you can take advantage of, but still you have to collect that data. You have to collect it in a way that you're going to be able to communicate with the EUDAMED module to get the registration completed. Next slide, please. Okay. So in case of the first sales unit of a legacy device or a regulation device that's been placed on the EU market before the date of mandatory use, you need to determine the new sales units of the same UDIDI. You need manufacturers bear the burden of proof if product is placed on the market prior to that. And each of the products must be registered in the UDI development module within 12 months from the publication of notice. No duplicate registration is needed, and no registration is needed if legacy devices are no longer placed on the market. So as many folks know, a lot of manufacturers decided that they would take some of their MDD cleared devices and actually remove them from the market instead of pursuing registration under MDR. So if a product is going to be no longer placed on the market, then that historical legacy device, you do not need to worry about registering. The only time this will come into play is if some kind of vigilance action occurs. If you've marketed a product and maybe it has a shelf life of 5 years, and then some vigilance issue happens, then of course you will need to use the database to comply with the vigilance activities as needed. Next slide, please. So what I wanted to focus on today in terms of what this means to manufacturers and economic operators is it's going to be very burdensome for companies to not only create their baseline data, but ensure that this data is maintained over time. EUDAMED compliance is not a one-time registration activity. It will continue through the life cycle of the product, and it needs to align with your quality system and your change management process and your post-market obligations. So as I mentioned, creating a regulatory plan that outlines how your company is going to address all of the EUDAMED requirements is really critical to success. You need maybe the first phase of the plan in terms of collecting all of your baseline data, but from that, how are you going to manage changes that impact the various attributes or documentation required within EUDAMED? So I'm going to walk through various kind of subtopics on this and what are common triggers that may impact the data that you have submitted in your baseline activities. So the first falls under actor and economic operator data maintenance. So if you are an economic operator or an actor within the EU requirements, any change that is made over time needs to be updated in the system. If you've had a legal entity name change, so maybe a company is acquired by another and they're moving to a new legal entity, the registration that you've done will need to be updated. If there's an address change where you have moved your manufacturing from one location to another, then that will also need to be updated. Your contact person that's listed, your PRRC that's listed, if that changes over time, maybe someone who was your appointed PRRC leaves the company for another organization, you'll have to make sure that that is updated in the system. And then also changes in economic operator roles. So many times, a lot of manufacturers distribute their product through just a distributor network. So if your distributors in various EU countries changes over time, you need to go in and add that new importer information into the system. You also will have product status changes over time, where you have active products within the EU market, suspended products, or products that are ceased to be distributed. So all of those fall into just the one category of actor and economic operator. So your quality system needs to be set up so that when these triggers occur, there is a clear path where someone is understanding, A, this does impact EUDAMED, B, who's responsible for making the change and when. And all of that should be proceduralized within your quality system. The second category that I'd like to discuss are your device and UDI data maintenance. Again, many things could impact your baseline data. If you have design changes, that could impact your UDI/DI. Some common triggers are your intended purpose, your risk class, your trade name over time. All of those will require maintenance activities. If you are adding new SKUs or configurations, you're expanding your product portfolio, that will also need to be updated. If you have discontinued a product or conducted a market withdrawal, those updates will need to be made. There's also a variety of labeling changes that could affect the regulated attributes. So understanding all of the attributes that go into your initial registration, and then again, having a process in place so that when modifications to those are made within your organization, that you trigger a EUDAMED assessment is really going to be critical for you to ensure that your data is always up to date. You also may need to just correct data. Maybe something was submitted that was inaccurate, just a quality error. There's a lot of data that you're going to be working with. If you've got a very broad portfolio, you're potentially talking about thousands of SKUs, thousands of attributes underneath each of those SKUs. So it can get very broad and overwhelming of the type of information that you need to update within this tool. The third bucket that I'd like to discuss is the certificate and notified body linkages. So of course, over time, once you have your initial certification to be able to market a product in Europe, that certificate can change over time. So you may be filing amendments for design changes or other things that prompt a new certificate to be issued or amended. In addition, you may have a suspension or a withdrawal of a certificate. There may be a new scope added to a certificate by a notified body. The scope changes over time. It may change to add additional product types. It may change to add additional locations if you have a high-level certificate issued at the corporate level. So all of these things need to be assessed. In addition, your certificate expiry dates may be updated. So all of those under the certificate will need to be monitored and a process in place for ensuring all the triggers are in place for you to say, hey, we need to go into the system and update these for this particular certificate or product. The next category is vigilance data maintenance. So there are vigilance requirements within EUDAMED. If there are new vigilance cases, follow-up reports, status changes, and any linked device or UDI corrections being made, those will need some maintenance activities for the vigilance data. The next subtopic is post-market surveillance. PMS reports get updated routinely. PSUR submissions for your higher risk class devices also are updated on a regular basis. If you have PMCF activities that are ongoing, any updates to those will need to be reflected in the EUDAMED system. And also, over time, there may be updates to your risk benefit conclusions. And if those are revised, that will also prompt a modification to your EUDAMED data. Next slide, please. The last category that I want to discuss is just market status and life cycle changes. So, over time, companies routinely place devices on a market, and they may temporarily have product that's unavailable. They may decide to permanently discontinue that product. You may be faced with a market withdrawal or recall, and all of those will need to be maintained so that the status in the system is accurate at all times. So one thing that I want to stress, and I've kind of alluded to it throughout the last couple of slides, is that there is an immense amount of data that organizations need to manage just to be compliant with EUDAMED. You need to manage that for your baseline submission by these deadlines in May, but then an ongoing maintenance activities and ensuring that you have proper procedures in place so that if any of the aforementioned activities are modified, that you are updating the EUDAMED system appropriately. So my suggestion for your baseline plan is, as I mentioned, to have a quality plan. How are we going to address EUDAMED? How are we going to get our data registered, to by the May deadline? But subsequent to that, you need to put all those controls in place that will trigger your maintenance activities. So, one of the most logical places to have those triggers in place is your currently existing change control process. Within that change control process, though, you need to make sure that you embed the proper questions so that the regulatory kind of workflows push out from those decisions. So when you're doing a change control, you're not just looking, oh, is my, safety and effectiveness affected where I've got to do a new submission in Europe, but also based on the various changes that I'm proposing in this change control, am I impacting any of the things above? Am I adding SKUs? Is my UDIDI changing? Is my risk changing? Any of the parameters that are involved in the device registration, are any of those impacted? And so you need to make sure that your change control process is asking for each of those kind of attributes. Do I need to update anything? And then once that decision is made, you need to understand the clear roles and responsibility for who owns that data and who's going to maintain it. Who is going to go in and be responsible for updating the database and ensuring that those changes are made prior to that modified product being placed on the market, or that new product being placed on the market. So with all of this coming online, a lot of conversations that I've had with manufacturers over the last 6 months, and especially those questions are picking up significantly since the November announcement of this May deadline, is how and where do we store the proper data? Companies have PLM systems. There's regulatory information systems similar to RegDesk where you can store your data. It's important to understand where the source of truth for that data is. And ideally, it's stored in a place and in a format that you can either extract that data in the right form to be able to upload into the EUDAMED database or speak directly to the EUDAMED database. So it's really critical that manufacturers start looking at this. If you haven't already, you're probably going to be hard pressed to have an automated system by May, but it's really important that you start asking those decisions, especially if you have a very broad portfolio of products, so that you can start getting your data cleansed and ready for this initial registration and then maintained over time. It's also important to note that there are intended to be audits of this data. You internally should be auditing it over time to make sure that things have not changed, that were not reflected in the EUDAMED database, and ensure that your process is effective for kind of giving those triggers and ensuring that updates are made. Auditors will absolutely be looking at this process. The EUDAMED process is kind of an extension of your quality management system. They will be looking to see how are you, creating a workflow and a process within your organization to ensure that EUDAMED stays current and accurate. So I stress to everyone that if you have not created a quality plan for your initial baseline data or developed a plan for your long-term maintenance, that you work on this with great priority in order to meet the deadline in May. Next slide, please. And I think this will kick it back over to you, Juan. Thank you.
Yeah. So thanks for Jody. That's it seems like a lot of homework to do for manufacturers. For the notified body side, it's a lot of homework for us to do as well. But I think DQS, for example, we have already started uploading the certificates. Feel free to check on the website to see if you have your certificate uploaded already. But any certificate issued after the mandatory use must be registered in the notified body, the CRF module, and also the new certificate issued thereafter. Any updated and decision issued in relation to the regulation certificates issued before the mandatory use, meaning if you have a change notification where you do need to change your certificate, look out for that. And also, if you have any withdrawal, refusal of application for conformity assessment, that's going to go on EUDAMED and that will be public. So, valid certificates issued before mandatory use of notified body module must be registered within 18 months. Fortunately, we have a longer deadline to for the mandatory use, but it's still shorthanded everywhere. And then we are in the process of uploading all the MDR certificates. And then for the clinical evaluation consultation procedures, and keep in mind this is mainly for the class 3 implantable and some of the 2B devices, especially with medicinal product combined, only for MDR as of right now, not for IVDR. And also the SSCPs, summaries of the safety clinical performance along with registration of relevant certificate will be uploaded to the EUDAMED. Basic UDI-DI and certificate is for the reference, and also it will be made public. So the key takeaway for manufacturers, as Jodi alluded to, is there are multiple triple linkage among basic UDI, DI certificates and SSCP. So make sure you have the accuracy at the basic UDI, DI level. And last but not least, jumping ahead. Please collaborate with your notified bodies. Your registration will not be public without notified bodies registration, but likewise, notified body cannot register without your registration as actor. You can certainly put your device on the market once you fulfill your obligations. And I repeat, you don't have to wait for notified body to upload your certificate, your clinical evaluation, etc. As long as you have confirmation or evidence that you fulfilled your obligation, then you are free to put your device on the market. So I have the link over there. If you happen to use DQS as your notified body, reach out to us. We will find the right person to support you along the journey. And with that, I included some references. And like I said, Guy will help send out the link for the playground. Takes a little while to find it, but I will send that out. With that, Jodi, have anything to add?
No, nothing to add. I think Gay's going to move us into Q&A session. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we'll work through as many as we can in the remaining time. Gay mentioned earlier, and I'll just repeat that any questions that are asked that we don't get to will be included in the handout materials that she'll send by the end of this week.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate everything you provided and covered. I know that gives people lots of information, and we do have lots of questions because I think this is so complex. One of the first questions is, there's like 3 questions to one specific scenario. I do think that it got maybe answered by the time they had asked it, but I'm just going to make sure, and it might be a good example to give for other people to get some answers as well. So the scenario is, they have a legacy device. Their device was CE marked under the MDD, and then they now have received CE under the MDR, but they have not fully transitioned yet. They are still manufacturing and placing the MDD version on the market. The first question about this is, do we need to enter the MDD legacy device information into EUDAMED?
Jodi, you want to take that or?
I actually don't know the answer to that. I believe that yes, you would have to register the MDD if you are currently placing product manufactured under the MDD still on the market. So if you are importing it today and it's an MDD manufactured device, then that MDD, all of the associated attributes for that MDD device should be in the system because it's really the date of when you're placing it on the market, what bucket it falls under. I believe that that's the correct answer. Juan, you can tell me if I'm wrong.
No, you're not wrong, but I think the right question to ask back is it really depends. Let me elaborate because you have the legacy device. It really matters if you have it under the same basic UDIDI, right? If you have a different basic UDIDI, scenario number one, I would assume you don't need to register or mandatory use EUDAMED because that individual product will be considered old device. You no longer place it under MDR moving forward. Instead, you have a new basic UDIDI under conformity of MDR, and that needs to follow the mandatory date of use, etc. That's scenario number one. Scenario number two, if you happen to have the same basic UDIDI, then that's exactly what Jodi said. Then you do need to register, including your MDD device, because it's the same UDIDI for the mandatory use. So I hope that helps.
I'm sure that does, and if not, this person that sent that, please just add another question at the bottom. Another question they had is, what is the deadline to register the legacy device? May 26, 26, or November 2026?
And okay, I can take that one if yeah. So if it's legacy, I think you have 18 months instead of the main deadline. You have a slightly longer transition period given the legacy status. But make sure, like I said in the other answer, make sure it's focused on the basic UDIDI level and make sure it is the definition of legacy device. So.
I'm glad you guys are answering these questions and not me. So the next question is, can the legacy device can it be approved under EU MDR or is it only MDD devices? And this is again from that same scenario I read about earlier.
I feel like we have a bunch of lawyers today. I feel like it's it's like play your words. Okay, Jodi, I'll try to take that one, and you can chime in. So once again, it really depends on the legacy device. Meaning, is it truly a legacy device? You have intention to continue selling it under MDR, and also you better already work on the application for MDR. If you don't have intention, meaning the sales unit are all distributed or placed on market with no further intention to place on market under MDR, then it's an old device. And then you don't need to register the old device under EUDAMED except when there is a post-market incidents. There's like a recall or there's a adverse event.
Yeah, and I think that that's one of the key steps and part of your quality plan is categorizing all of your products because every manufacturer pretty much at this point has things falling in different buckets based on the decisions they've made to transition from MDD to MDR and the status of that transition. You know, you may have some MDR's approvals in place for some of your products. You may have other applications that are still pending. You may have applications that you've decided not to transition. So categorizing your product so you understand what your obligations are is going to be a key piece in your quality plan.
And also I want to highlight, kind of add in question on that is if you have device in the process of getting conformity assessment of MDR, you also need to work on the registration, the mandatory use, because notified body cannot upload their certificate, your certificate, without you first register your device. So understand the divide, I don't know how much because Jodi went through that slide pretty in detail, but that's the key. There is understand your responsibility obligation when it comes to the mandatory use of the UDAMED versus what's going to be in place of other players such as notified body. So you have to do those as early as possible so that the other players such as notified body will be able to upload your information on your behalf. So
Perfect. Thank you guys for clarifying all that. Hopefully that answered those questions for that individual. And next question we have is if you have a legal manufacturer change on a product, would you need to keep two records live? One with the original LM for vigilance purposes and one with the new LM.
yeah, lawyer's question again. I feel like, but Jodi, let me try this one. I would argue no because I don't believe you said change, right? I would assume you will have the same UDIDI. It's just changing the feature, changing the design, whatnot. So as long as you have the same UDIDI, then that's one. That's one device in the eyes of UDAMED. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and I think the key for, especially for significant changes like legal manufacturing changes, you have to look at it holistically. A lot of times, legal manufacturing changes don't involve just changing the legal manufacturer on the label. Many times, a lot of other parallel activities are going on. Maybe you've acquired a company, you're going to be moving that particular device to a new location. So I don't want you to fall into a trap where you're only looking at changing the legal manufacturer on the label itself. That will require maintenance in the system. You're going to have to update it if you're no longer going to market with the old legal manufacturer address. But look at the project holistically and make sure that all the changes that are encompassed in that change control and in that transition from one legal manufacturer to another, that you're doing a UDAMED assessment. Because any legal manufacturer project I've ever been involved in is very wide in scope. There's a lot of moving parts, and you have to be really mindful about assessing each of those individual changes and its impact on your UDAMED data.
Thank you. And we do have a lot of questions, so I'm glad we have a little bit of extra time to answer all these great questions. The next one is, do or will manufacturers have access to the post-market surveillance module, for example, PCER upload?
I can take that one. Short answer is yes. You're the one. As a matter of fact, you're the one uploading it. So yeah, you should have access. I think I could be wrong, but I think what he's trying to ask is after the upload, what kind of access it will have. So as a manufacturer, you will have for your own data, you will have 100% access. But for other device or similar device data, you will only have same access as other actors, which is a summary that will be uploaded by CA, the competent authority of the region you put on the market for. So I think that's the question he's trying to ask.
Thank you for clarifying and giving that answer. Another question is, hi, is there any news about the local national registration? Will UDAMED portal replace all local registrations in each of the EU countries?
Oh, well, that's a good one. Um, the short answer is I don't know. As you can imagine, member states, we have like what 28 of them. It's really hard to get a consensus on what to do, what not to do. But the safest way is to do both. I know it's a lot to ask, but for the foreseeable future, unless there's a formal publication saying that it's going to replace local registrar, I would recommend you to keep both.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where your regulatory intelligence monitoring is going to be very critical over the next, year or so. There's going to be a lot of changes within the member state. Everyone tracks EU changes, I think, pretty diligently, but those individual member states also make announcements and they also modify things over time. So as an example, Italy, there's the Italian data bank. You've got to update all your information for the Italian data bank before you can put product on the market there, even once your CE certificates are issued. At the moment, you're still going to be obligated to do that until Italy themselves tells you it's no longer required. So monitoring and ensuring that that regulatory intelligence is feeding into your process is going to be critical. And then understanding what those transition periods are, because the last thing that you want is to have a compliance issue where you have placed product on the market in a given member state. You thought you did everything because you complied with EUDAMED, but in fact, those member states have additional obligations. So, RegDesk, as an example, we monitor all of those regulatory changes. And if there are updates made, we not only send those alerts out to our clients, but we also update our regulatory intelligence database. So it's very clear what the responsibilities are for every actor involved in the process for that given member state, and also, both EU requirements and member state requirements separately.
All right, we have a few more still coming in. So any suggestions or source for making changes to the XML files for companies that have around 100 device entries?
I can't speak to the XML file, other than to say that I think the EUDAMED folks who've developed this process, they're trying to refine the tools to make the process easier when you're having to upload many products in your product portfolio. I think folks are still kind of working through that, and my guess is you're going to see change over time as the modules are used. They're going to realize what is and is not working, and I think you'll see some refinement of that process over time. But I think that's one reason why the source data, where is your source of truth for all of these attributes that need to go into the portal? Where are you storing them? How are you maintaining them? How are you getting that data out so that it's usable for the EUDAMED module, will be increasingly important, especially for very large organizations that have thousands and thousands of different products in their portfolio.
That makes sense. Another question we have is, do I need clinical evaluation for class 1 device? And if yes, do I need to upload it into the EUDAMED?
Wow. Okay. Well, once again, it really depends. Depends on what type of class 1, right? I would say in general, clinical data is required or clinical evaluation is required, but that doesn't mean you need to have clinical study, or real clinical data. The key word is evaluation. And that's true not only for class 1, for class 2, 2B, or even higher is, the evaluation. As long as you evaluate and you feed it back to your risk mitigation, and end of the day, there's no residual risk where all the risks are mitigated, and then that's fine. That's sufficient.
Yeah, and usually those decisions are made and need to be made long before you're ever entering a new
Right.
product into EUDAMED. Those decisions and discussions need to happen while you pursue actually getting your initial approvals and certificates. And if it's a class 1 product where you're not actually submitting a tech doc to a notified body for approval, it's still your obligation to kind of walk through what those requirements are and what threshold you're going to need to meet. So I can say from a clinical perspective, EUDAMED certainly isn't introducing anything new in terms of requirements. You need to kind of go back to your MDR requirements to kind of flesh through that and make your decisions.
Right.
Perfect. And then thank you for clarifying. I had a question and wasn't sure how to read it out to you guys, so I appreciate the clarification. So if there's a manufacturer and they move to a new location and there's no change of production process or product, the new address must be indicated on the device label with an update of the label. Will this simple change require a new UDI?
That's not a simple change at all.
Well, what they asked
That's not
before,
a
I
simple,
could not translate how to ask it to you guys,
yeah.
so
No, Jodi,
I
you
needed
could
some help.
correct me if I'm, but I've seen too many of them. It's it's the end of the day, you're moving the production location. Unless it's just a paper change, meaning you outsource everything, you just change your headquarter, which has no function whatsoever. I highly doubt that case, but in a change of address, there's a long list of things you need to consider, and I would say 90% of the case, it's a significant change. So, do work with your consultant or your regulatory team, and more importantly, inform your notified body, and then you will get more definitive answer, and start preparing for that.
Yeah, and I think with UDIDI, you should have a decision tree within your organization so that as changes come up, you have a well thought out process, a defined process for determining when you're going to modify that UDI, and when you're not. And if your organization doesn't understand what those triggers should be, certainly, get someone on board either in a consultancy basis or whatnot that can help you develop that decision tree so that you don't make mistakes and not make changes when they're appropriate.
Perfect. And we have a couple more questions, so hopefully we can get to these. We have just a few more minutes left. So with legacy MDD devices with the same BUDI as the MDR device, is there some sort of update needed in the EUDAMED when the first MDR device goes on the market?
I think that's in one of the slide Jodi mentioned. That's where you have different scenarios. If your device was placed on market under MDD or before the publication of mandatory use, you have a deadline, versus if the same UDIDI was introduced after the mandatory use, you have a different deadline. I can't remember top of my head, but feel free to go back to the slide, and then that's listed there.
Perfect. And then we will do one last question. Thanks for answering about the local registration. That was one of the questions we had earlier. Is there any link or connection between UDAMED and the local MOH database?
I don't want to speak out of turn, but I'm fairly certain no. Fairly certain.
Jodi, you have anything to add, or you?
Yeah, no, no.
Okay.
Definitely the local ministries of health, each member state, they're going to be well apprised of what's in UDAMED and what's not, and well apprised of what their individual member states require and the databases that they may have, like the Italian data bank as an example. So, the whole intent eventually is that everyone works kind of in concert together, and tools like UDAMED ultimately would eliminate the need of having, 20 plus different requirements from one member state to another. That's the ideal scenario. It's going to take time to get us there, and I think it's going to evolve a lot. So, be sure that you're looking at your regulatory intelligence and that you're really monitoring. I can say, no other region, in my view, is like changing things so significantly over the last 10 years other than EU. There's so much being modified and so much being learned. And then other countries are saying, hey, that's a good idea. Let's now like implement similar requirements within our country. So there's going to be a lot of continued dynamic change over time.
All right, well, great. I think we got all through all of our questions. I know that was a lot, so I'm glad we had so much extra time at the end to be able to cover all of those. If anybody has any additional questions, please reach out to us or DQS. I want to thank DQS for hosting this with us. And Yuan and Jodi, you guys provided so much valuable information. And I love how y'all shared different pieces of things. So I feel like everybody got a great overview. And thank you all for joining us today.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.